We're back with another political show, and today we're going to be discussing how there's a master plan to choke China's energy via Iran. With me to discuss that theory today is Mustafa Jinadu. I'm still Afolabi. Welcome to another political show.
Okay, so Brian Berletic has the evidence to show that the real strategy that the U.S. and the West have been trying to do is to destabilize the world, especially areas where there's energy supply and oil, in order to choke China of oil and gas and energy to help bring the downfall of their economy since they're America's number one main competitor and a real threat to the dollar. If China rises, the dollar is in real danger, especially since the U.S. is in debt. So this theory of his is based on evidence from the Persia report, which I think was 2009, and from stuff that Wolfowitz wrote. And the general idea is that to contain China, you can't attack them. You can't attack China through the waters because their defense systems are basically hell. You go through there, you fuck around and you'll find out. You can't go that way. So what they're trying to do is choke China from a distance by choking the supply of energy. Because we know that China, which has over 1 billion people and is the world's greatest producer and manufacturer of goods, needs a ton of energy. So in order to stop them, choke them of energy. And the documents show this strategy. I mean, these documents can be easily found. Wolfowitz has talked about it, and like I said, the Persia report has talked about it. The strategy was is to contain Russia by having them have a war with Ukraine because Russia is one of China's main oil and gas exporters, and at the same time to put a stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz, and I think it's Malacca, the Strait of Malacca, those ports, those areas where oil comes in, and by doing that, disrupt the production of the transportation of oil. So basically, what he's trying to say, I don't know if this is true, but I think it's half true, half not true. He's basically saying that America is on purposely provoking Iran to do a blockade so that the result of that would be that China doesn't get oil and gas, and that's going to choke them out. I don't know if Trump and America went so far as to set up themselves in a war in which they would lose just to on purposely cause chaos to starve China because it's also going to starve the West and bring them down. But his theory is that this is the end of the Western Empire, and China's very close to becoming independent with energy independent, which means they won't need oil or gas from other people because they have other sources through regeneration of energy, wind, nuclear, and also green. So what they're trying to do is starve them right now so that they have a social fragmentation in their country, which stops their production of goods and things. I think it's the last gasp chance from the empire, and I do think this war was not started to cause regime change in Iran. It was caused to put chaos to the BRICS system. We saw what they did with Venezuela. They're also blocking Venezuela, which is choking out Cuba, and also um, limiting the supply that China has. Now they've gone after Iran, which has the supply, and they're fighting Russia. So this is a war. You see, this is a multi-hybrid world war in which you see all the major theaters of the war are areas where there's oil and energy. What are your thoughts, Fulabi?
Yeah, so basically, the US is planning to hang China by putting a noose around its neck. How do they intend to do this? They want to choke China, basically create a kind of a maritime blockade around China. Basically, they feel that if they're able to control the water passages, specifically the choke points around the Strait of Malacca and Hormuz, that the US can switch off the energy China needs to run its economy. So basically, thinking that the attack against Iran was a blunder or was kamikaze. It's not actually a blunder. It's part of a plan that has been put in place as far back as 1992, which you mentioned, the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which states that U.S. must prevent any new rival, whether it is Russia, India, or China, from dominating regions with critical resources. So it's based on this doctrine that this attack has gone on, basically to strangle China from getting energy from Iran. And how do they intend to do this? What they intend to do is that they want to destabilize Iran, create a blockade around critical access routes like the Strait of Hormuz, and basically they're targeting China's Belt and Road Initiative, basically the pipelines in Pakistan, basically
Yeah.
to attempt to bypass the U.S. controlled sea lanes. The U.S. uses proxies, militants, and rebels to sabotage these land routes, all targeted at preventing China from getting energy. But if you look at it, the way China is designed, China is more of a win-win kind of mentality. They're not a hegemon. Their relationship with other countries in the world is free and fair. So basically, if this happens, China has a lot of options on the table to decide what to do. Like you rightly mentioned, they're beginning to develop alternative energy resources and not depending on fossils anymore. They foresaw this happening basically, and they knew what's going to happen. So they have a plan in place to ensure that if this happens, they can then pivot towards maybe South America, Venezuela, and all those other countries, and maybe possibly Russia as well. It could come as a cost, but since China is the dominant country when it comes to shipping cost as well will go up, and then it will be a win-win situation for China.
Like the
So
whole world.
yeah, so basically,
And also,
if they do this to China, they already have a plan in place to see that they can weather the storm.
yeah, and it's a foolhardy plan because if China collapses now, the U.S. debt is held by China, and the U.S. even if you get rid of China with their inflation and the fact that the money is almost worth nothing because they're just printing money, without China, which is holding most of the commodities and production, once that void is gone, once the supply that comes from China is gone, it's going to lead to chaos all over the world. But we know that the Europeans are mad enough to bring the world to chaos just to make sure that China doesn't want to live. Because what it is that the U.S. and the West, they don't want a multipolar world in which everybody's doing well. They want a unipolar world in which they're the hegemony. But like you said, and also their plan hasn't worked because Russia's economy has become stronger since the Ukraine war. Because the idea was to stranglehold Russia first, to cut off oil supply for China. But actually, what it did was Russia now started rerouting their oil and gas because of the sanctions. They started rerouting it to China, and India started buying it. So by they didn't succeed in choking Russia because Russia is handling the war well and their economy is doing well. All they did was cut their own people, the Europeans, of supply of gas and oil, and then they actually started brought a new market for China because Russia wasn't selling as much oil and gas to China until after the war started. So the war actually helped them. The second thing is that they were hoping that by attacking Iran and causing disruptions there, they will cause a choke in supply, which may very well happen. But if that happens, oil could go to 200 or 300 a barrel and everybody falls apart. But what they didn't suspect was that Iran would actually evict America from the Middle East. And now that America's not in the Middle East, they can't enforce a stranglehold on Iranian oil because all of the U.S. bases in UAE and in Saudi Arabia and everything have been destroyed. And also Israel is pummeling. So it's being pummeled and they can't stand another 6 months of war. And we've even seen that the U.S. and Israel are now saying that they're slowing down the war and making it less intense. They're making it less intense because they've run out of interceptor missiles and they want this to be a low-grade war. And it's backfired. And it seems like Iran wants to keep the war intense by sending missiles. So their goal of trying to cause chaos in Iran it's caused some chaos in Iran, but it's caused more chaos in Israel and for the West and the rest of the world because the Strait of Hormuz is choked up now. But actually, Iran is letting Chinese ships go, letting Russian ships go, and is blockading American and European ships. So this was a desperate attempt. But I think to think that the U.S. miscalculated and didn't calculate all this would happen is false. I think they knew it would happen, but they knew that this is a Hail Mary. This is almost the end of the U.S. hegemony. China's only 5 years away from becoming energy independent. So they felt that even though they probably predicted all of this would happen, but they said it's worth giving it a try because this is their last chance to break China. And apparently it's not going to work. So what I'm saying is that everything you see America doing now was not a blunder, even though it's not working. It was just their last desperate attempt. What do you think, Afolabi?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a last chance saloon at saving a falling empire and to remain a hegemon and an imperial power. But if you look at this, I mean, putting a noose around China's neck is suicidal because you're basically doing the same thing to yourself. If the US blockades the Strait of Hormuz, global oil prices could skyrocket to between $200 and $300 per barrel. Potentially, this is destroying the US and European economies alongside China's. And The Russia, Iran, and China have formed a very formidable strategic alliance. Russia's land-based pipelines and Iran's continued oil flow to China mean that maritime news is being bypassed even before it is tightened. They have alternatives, viable
Yeah,
alternatives. So Washington basically is in a race against time because the global balance of power is shifting towards a multipolar world, basically, where many nations have power. So basically, this theory by Berelick views the current US aggression as desperate. And like you said, it's a final attempt to keep control before the window closes forever.
yeah. And I'll say this. See, it's too late now. Here's where the U.S. lost. The U.S. lost when they became a manufacturing giant, and at the peak of their manufacturing, um, I was going to say giancy. That's not the right word, but at the peak of their industrial power in
Boom. There was
manufacturing,
an industrial boom.
boom. What they did was the capitalists in America didn't want to pay American labor, so they now shipped all of their labor to China, and that's how they gave China the foothold to now become the industrial giant of the world. So the mistake America made was through its capitalist systems, the people who own the car companies, the engine companies, they say we can pay people in China 1/10 or 1/100th of what we're paying Americans. So basically, by deindustrializing America, that's how America lost its empire. And at the same time, it deindustrialized itself. It started to create a military industry based on printing money to get paid for weapons because you can't tax people. If you tax Americans for weapons, they're gonna throw you out of office. So they deindustrialized. They made the dollar fiat, which means it didn't have to be backed by anything. So they could create paper money and create a military which is eating up the social fabric of the country. That's why we're at a point now where they have to try to strangle China because they starved themselves by creating a predatory military system which is based on debt rather than products which Americans need. I don't care how your hegemony, if you can't get toothpaste, toilet paper, deodorant, car parts, rare earth minerals, you can't do anything, and they're dependent on all of that for China. So it's basically game over. Last thoughts, I'll take us out.
Yeah, so basically, China is ready for this. I even hear they have a reserve of over 1.4 billion barrels in store. So they have enough to hedge against this. And then, like I said, China has a unique advantage. It's not purely oil dependent. They're going to increase coal, they're going to expand nuclear and hydropower and all the renewables, solar and wind. So they're basically ready for this. I think America's timing of this is ill-advised. But like you said, it's a fading empire. They have to desperately do something to save their face, and it's the last chance saloon. But it might just backfire for all you know.
All of us, of course. Motherfucker, man. I got a beer. The price of beer gonna go up because the price of diesel goes up because the truck that brings the beer to me needs diesel. Thank you a
Yeah.
lot, Donald Trump. All right, all right, let's go to the next one. I'll start the next one.